Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Janell Blue, and today I have with me my friend and genealogy colleague, Susan Jeter. Welcome, Susan.
Good morning.
First of all, I want to thank the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, who is our sponsor, and also Sidney Sachs and his crew for helping to make this program possible. Well, normally in genealogy, we talk about family trees and third cousins and researching at courthouses and DNA and so forth. But today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about food. Why food? Well, if you've ever gone back into your memory and you thought about that cold winter night when you went into your home and your mom was cooking something that you loved and you had this memory, and that memory transcended perhaps down from several generations. There's something about food that is important for genealogy, and it takes us back to another time, another culture, traditions, and all sorts of good memories, often good memories. If you were lucky enough to have a mom who cooked, or maybe it was your grandmother, or maybe it was an aunt, or maybe it was the next door neighbor who you were able to go over there and enjoy the food. It was tasty. There was a wonderful ambiance. There was, love in the house in some way that generated a wonderful feeling. Today we call that comfort food, but it also perhaps reaches way back to generations. Did you have that kind of experience, Susan?
I certainly did, yes. So many different foods. If I smell them, see them, it will bring back all of those memories and the feelings from the past. And my mother and my grandmother, my sisters, all good cooks.
They say there are, it triggers endorphins in your brain, and that brings that memory back and the good feelings back. And so we want to talk about that today and sort of bring in a recipe that, to me, it triggers a lot of this. And it also represents, in our case, I'm from Texas. Susan,
I'm from South Carolina.
South Carolina. So this is kind of a little bit of a Southern dish, but it's also, I have a German heritage, you have a Germanic heritage with Swiss, and it also incorporates those traditions and that food that happened back in those days as well. So I know my mother learned these dishes from her mother and my great-grandmother too.
As my house too.
And the thing about this dish is that it is so basic that you don't really have to be German to know about chickens. And we're going to do chicken and dumplings today. So what Google says is that chickens were first domesticated 8,000 years ago. And it is just everywhere. All countries use chicken in some way. It's probably because it's easy to grow. It's sort of multi-purpose because it has eggs as well as the meat. And you can cook it in a million different ways. And then even you said your mom or your grandmother used the feathers even.
Yes, she used feathers and made our pillows.
Yeah.
So with that striped blue and white striped fabric, tick fabric or whatever it's called. Yes.
Yeah. So there was a reason why chickens were so prevalent, and also they are supposedly good medicinal properties in there.
For sure.
And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But usually, if you think of wanting some comfort when you're sick, there's usually somebody will arrive with some chicken noodle soup or something. And so there's that. Now the other thing that is also thousands of years old is dumplings. And dumplings originated supposedly in China. And if you go to any Chinese or any Asian restaurant of some sort, you're going to have a dumpling there, the possibility of a dumpling on the menu. But every culture has their own idea about dumplings. when you think about it, dumplings are made with some sort of grain or a staple that's always going to be in the household. They're going to have some sort of lard or vegetable shortening of some sort in it. Every pioneer family had these ingredients with some salt, a little bit of yeast of some sort or baking powder. And then a little liquid of some sort. I mean, we're going to use milk, but it could be anything.
Broth, water.
Yeah, and so that is how simple it is. Now, the Germans also use bread. They use potato starch for their dumplings. Today we're going to use flour and the basic ingredients. So why don't we get started on this very straightforward, wonderful dish, and Susan can make this better than anybody else. And
it's always better when somebody else cooks it, yeah.
We use the same ingredients, but the technique, we can't teach technique because it's just, she just does it better than anybody. But we're going to show you how to do it today, and let's just start with the beginning.
Okay. You know what? The first thing you need to do is start a pot of water boiling, and then we're going to add the simplest of ingredients. Now, when my mom made it, she would add in onions, all chopped rough, it doesn't matter, sliced if you want to, but you add in your onions. My mom didn't do this, but I like to add celery. Some recipes call for a carrot, and I sometimes put in a carrot, but I think that celery and onions is perfect. But there's one other ingredient my mom or grandma never used, and that's parsley. And I think parsley and celery leaves give it the best flavor you can imagine. If you want a more peppery flavor, you can leave the stems on. I don't usually, but you just put the parsley right in. Water's boiling. We would add a pinch of salt, some pepper, freshly ground's always best too, and then the chicken comes. Now this is a young chicken. You get different flavors if you use a young chicken or if you use a hen. The hen is a little older, gives a little better flavor, and if you're having a bigger crowd, more than 10 people, you would want to use a hen probably. But you just take your chicken and put it in the pot. We used to always rinse our chickens, didn't we? But now with new food safety rules, you don't rinse the chicken. It's going to get cooked. Everything will be cooked, boiled to death by the time the chicken is done, so you don't need to worry about the bacteria.
Well, I think it's great that you're not trying to cut up the chicken, because I do not like that part of it. I feel like I get that chicken all over me, the sink gets contaminated nowadays. Now, in the old days, for some reason, chickens didn't seem to be as dangerous as they are today.
I agree.
And so who knows what that's all about. But now you have to be very careful.
You do.
When you work with a chicken in your kitchen to be able to make sure you don't contaminate everything. So this just cuts right to it. You don't have to cut up anything.
And you know, that's another secret you reminded me. When I first started making chicken and dumplings, I didn't like to cut up the chicken either. So I thought, okay, I like breast best of all. So I just used breast. Something was missing. And so somebody said, oh, thigh meat's good. So I put boneless chicken breast and boneless thighs.
Oh, but you lost.
So easy. All the bones in the chicken of any meat actually is what gives it the best flavor.
Yeah.
So yes, the whole chicken, bones and everything. And once it's cooked, you cook it for an hour and a half covered. Go read a book. Do it. I mean, it's that easy. You've got your chicken on. You can do anything else for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then when you come back, that's the next step.
That sounds really good. I look forward to the next step. Okay, it's been about an hour and a half or so. Susan, how would we know when the chicken is ready?
In the olden days, before we had to worry about the temperature of the chicken being reached to a perfect point, I just tell when the legs are sort of falling off to the side, and and the meat is very tender. With now, they recommend that you cook the chicken to a temperature of 185 degrees to be sure that it's completely done. But even so, cooking it with the dumplings is going to cook it even more. So, but you don't want it to fall apart either. So it's perfect at 185.
Okay. So you've taken it out of the
We've taken it out, and so we just take I do it by hand. I think you use a fork to shred, but you'd break the chicken into bite-sized pieces. Trying to be careful with the bones, but I declare, seems like there's always a bone in there somewhere, but the nice big pieces of meat are lovely. The thigh is all of it just very nice. Not too big, not too little.
And you take the skin off, right?
Yes, the skin comes off. You put the bones away, and so you're left just with the chicken, nothing else.
The skin really helps to develop the flavor in the broth, doesn't it?
In the broth, for certain.
Some people will want to defat the broth before they go to the next step, but in this case, I
never have. So I know many recipes, and there are 1,000 chicken and dumpling recipes with variations in the amounts of the flour or the shortening or whatever. But what I use, I don't have my mom's written down recipe, but I know that she used flour. Betty Crocker says 1.5 cups. So 1.5 cups of flour, salt, baking powder, and then I use Crisco shortening, and this is 3 tablespoons of Crisco.
Do you think they used like animal fat in the old days?
I bet they did. I know my father grew up on a farm. My grandfather raised everything. They had cows, chickens, pigs. They milled their own flour. Everything they were self-contained. So I know that they probably did, but I know Mama used Crisco oil shortening.
Yeah,
and
vegetable shortening. Yeah.
And I don't know that butter would work very well, but you can use a fork. I like a pastry blender and blend it right up in there so it's a coarse meal kind of look.
That pastry blender, you can buy that in any store or on Amazon or something.
You sure can.
It's pretty easy to get, and it's handy for a lot of things.
It is.
I made a pie crust the other day and
Absolutely.
used it with that too.
The last ingredient is the liquid. I use milk. Full 2% fat-free is what I'm using today, which is just because that's what we drink, but you can use any type of milk. I can't tell that it makes a difference for a dumpling because you can use water or broth as well.
Now, did you put salt in there?
Salt and baking soda, yes. Baking powder.
So sometimes I will add like poultry seasoning or some kind of herbs with it too, and it gives it a little different flavor. But but you don't do that, and it's still wonderful. So it's better to stick to the basics. Wow, that is really cooking now.
It is ready. So what you do is take a spoon, about a tablespoon of dumpling batter, and drop it onto the boiling liquid. Spaced a bit apart.
Doesn't have to be precise.
Does not. Sometimes they're big and fat, and sometimes they're small, but about the same size. Now in Germany, they have different noodles that they boil on it. One's called a Simica noodle or something like that, and it's more of a flour type, and so they will make it into a ball. My stepmother would take this dough and roll it out and cut it into strips.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of dough, this is the kind of dumpling I like. It's like a cloud from heaven. It's a big, puffy dumpling.
Yeah, a lot of times in the restaurants, you're going to get that other kind of dumpling, the strip dumpling.
Yes.
And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they can be tough.
They can, sort of gummy.
And so this is almost foolproof.
There.
And the technique is that you're not going to cover it right away, right?
No, you cook it for 10 minutes open. This is what Betty Crocker says. Now, the old Williamsburg cookbook And other ones that I've read say you cover it for 15 minutes. But my technique is uncovered for 10 and then cover it for 10.
Yep. That's what my recipes say too.
One other thing, I love black pepper, and so I like to grind a little pepper on top. But like you said, you can put herbs in the dumplings, or you can put even more parsley.
If you're going to do this from the beginning, and it's probably better to just do it this way first and
Yes,
see what
so
you think.
simple.
And the cool thing about this is that the flour, some of the flour is going to sort of make it into the gravy.
It does.
So it's not, and then it kind of thickens it, doesn't it? And that's what gives it a wonderful soupy flavor.
There is one more step I do that my mom did not do, and that is I use an immersion blender for the celery and onions to mix it all up in there so that it's a nice smoother broth. But my mom just left it all in chunks. Well, it cooks down pretty nicely, but this smooths it out, and you have a nicer sauce, in my opinion. But it's
Now,
not
when
like
do
Mom
you
did.
do that, though?
I do it just before I put the chicken and the dumplings in.
In there, okay.
When you take the chicken out. Sorry, I missed that part.
Okay. Well, that's all right. It'll still have all the flavors.
It
just
will.
may be a little different texture.
And
But,
smell the aroma.
oh, I know.
Does it take you back to your mama's kitchen?
Oh my gosh, it does. Absolutely. You know, this is just so basic and so good. And I know that my ancestors ate this because they lived in the country. They had chickens.
And it's so economical too.
It's very economical, and it's a stretcher actually. Those
yes.
dumplings cost very little to make, and it's quite a stretcher. And those dumpling recipes are all over the place. You mentioned the Williamsburg cookbook that you brought. I have a book that my mother had that was published in 1937. It's a Crisco, made by Crisco. And there's a dumpling recipe in that too. Mother also left little index cards, and it would say, Aunt Kate's dumplings.
Oh boy.
And it was like you said, it was like a pinch of this and a little of that. And I never could quite recreate it. But the point is that Aunt Kate was born like early or late 1800s. And so we're talking about a tradition, a cultural tradition that's been handed down all these
For
years.
generations and generations.
And I make this, I don't cook as much as I used to anymore, but I, every once in a while, I just get a hankering for those. And I will make that because it just feels really good.
It
to
does.
do.
And when my boys come home, what do they like? Chicken pot pie, chicken and dumplings, chicken and rice. Chicken is such a basic, isn't it?
It is. And they, because why do you suppose they want those things?
Because Mama made them.
And Mama loves them, right?
Yes, Mama loves them. Yes, it's made with love for sure.
So part of this whole thing is the food, and part of it is what goes with it, and the
Exactly.
intangible that goes with it.
Perfectly
and
said.
I hope that you were lucky enough to have that in your life. But if you didn't, then now's the time to maybe start that tradition with your children or your niece and nephew, or with your good friends.
Yes, a party. It's a
there's-
great party dish.
Yeah, there's never a time when you can't begin a tradition. And I mean, you may not be around to see it being handed down from generation to generation, but you can know that you were part of something really good.
Really good.
All right, so these guys have got to cook now for about 20 more
minutes.
And so we are going to let that just sit. If she's getting ready to put the lid on in about
5-ish minutes
or so. And then we will see what the final product is going to be, and I can't wait. Okay, Susan, are we ready to eat?
Oh, I think it's time.
Oh my gosh,
Shall we?
let's see. Oh, look at that.
Oh, and Janelle, I couldn't have planned it better. Look, one's even in the shape of a heart.
That is real comfort
Exactly.
food, isn't it?
Exactly. That means our ancestors are
Smiling
here
on
too,
us,
smiling
yeah.
on us today.
Oh my gosh, they look so fluffy.
They
and
do look
good.
nice and fluffy, don't they?
I think we should try them.
Let's do.
All right. Here is my plate.
Right.
I'm just going to take a wee bit here because it's going to be hot.
Perfect.
Is that enough?
That looks great.
All right, here we go. There is for you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to also do some here. Oh my gosh, I can hardly wait.
Oh,
Got
it
a little
smells heavenly.
chicken too. All right, here's the big taste test.
Thank you.
Ready?
Ready,
Ooh.
set.
Oh wow.
I am a little girl again,
Oh.
sitting around the table with my parents. I could start crying with it evokes such memories, I kid you not, with my parents and my sisters around the table, and there's music in the background. No doubt the Kingston Trio or the Everly Brothers, because that's what they fancied in those days. And the joy that this dish brings is so many levels.
Yeah, it is, and the textures of this dumpling is great. And I can taste the baking powder a little bit, but it has such a nice flavor to it, and the salt is just perfect, and it just kind of melts in your mouth.
It does, doesn't it? That's a good description. It does melt in your mouth. Which I think a rolled dumpling doesn't do, but that's my preference, and I'm sticking to it. But so many people, the rolled dumpling would evoke those very same feelings.
And you know that sort of harkens back to the whole idea of a dumpling. And I was thinking about our pioneer ancestors. Mine came in the mid-1800s, and yours were probably shortly after that.
Shortly
or around
after
there.
late 1800s, early 1900s.
And
yes.
they were not wealthy people,
No,
so they
no.
came with probably just a small amount of provisions and maybe a small amount of money, and they started farms.
They did.
So they were obviously going to have a chicken on the farm, and they were going to have flour and all these basic things that are there.
They would.
But they weren't going to have a lot of the things that we have today.
No parsley.
No, probably not any parsley. Good point. They may not have even had celery.
Celery, even as basic as celery.
I don't know when celery came about.
I don't either.
But it might have just, now they might have had onions.
Definitely. They had to have.
Seems like onions were
That would be
around
in
a long time.
a cook's garden, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And then, in Germany, they used a lot of bread. So leftover bread, and they could have used maybe bread and some of the flour
To
and
make
stuff to make
the ball of noodle or dumpling.
or slice. I mean, I've had some in the Czech Republic that were like sliced. Even.
Oh, even just sliced.
Yeah. So there was that, but I think the point is that they made do with what they had.
They did.
And it was basic stuff that there was no Wegmans or Costco
Safeway,
or Giant or there was no easy grocery store that was in the neighborhood. So our ancestors would have used lard, and you know what lard is? Pure animal fat.
It is.
And the funny thing is that that's beginning to make a comeback.
It is because of the flavor, isn't it? That would probably add such unique flavor to this. I might have to give it a try.
Well, I don't know how you can improve on this. It's so good, but you could just for fun to see. I know people who still make pie crust with lard, and it does give it a little bit different flavor. But I'm sure our ancestors used lard because it was what they had.
And the first dumpling that was made early in the day in the United States was made with cornmeal, because that's when they came over. They didn't have flour, but the Indians introduced them to corn, and the Indians ground it down and made their cakes and things. But I believe they must have made I think greens and the cornmeal dumplings are a thing. I've never even tasted one. That's another thing to try.
You should try that
I
since your
should.
daddy was in the
My
business.
father was a miller. I'm the miller's daughter. Yes, in South Carolina, he ground the corn into meal and grits.
Oh my gosh, that would be great. Well, Susan, I can't thank you enough for putting all of this together and showing us how to make a delicious meal. We probably didn't price it out, but it was probably pennies on the dollar.
Pennies
I would
on the
think,
dollar for sure.
per serving, and what a delicious, wonderful, not only food but all of the memories that it triggers, and how comforting that is. And so, thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you for the invitation, and it was a perfect day. Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to leave a morsel of this because it is so good. Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.